What's up, gents, and welcome to another episode of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, the show that gives you the tips and tools you need to make yourself stronger, faster, and harder to kill. Today, we're gonna dive into one of the most enduring, powerful, and surprisingly practical ideas to come down to us from antiquity, and that is the heroic life. Now, when you hear the word heroic, you might be thinking about comic book characters or action movie stars or stuff like that, but I want to suggest to you something much deeper, that the heroic life isn't just about slaying dragons or storming beaches. It's about a way of being. It's a code. It's a mindset. It's a complete worldview handed down to us by our ancestors that is rooted in courage, honor, action, and sacrifice. And even though the modern world tries its best to drown these values out in a flood of comfort and distraction and convenience, they're still here. They're waiting for those of us who are bold enough to claim them. And in fact, I believe the future of our civilization very much depends upon those of us who will reclaim this worldview once again. This is like I said, it's going to be a pretty deep topic. I've been wanting to do this one for a long time, but I wanted to do it right. And the more I studied, the more I felt like I wasn't really prepared to talk about it. And then it's so deep that I realized that I'll spend my whole life studying this and never be ready. So I thought I would just kind of roll out what I have. But before we get into that, I do want to give a shout out to my premium subscribers on Substack. Thank you so much for your support. It means a lot. For those of you who are interested in maybe upgrading from a free account to a premium membership, go ahead. There's a link below in the show notes, and you can do that for less than the price of one of those number 2 meals at McDonald's, and it won't make you fat. And you can get access to exclusive members content only. So without further ado, can I one time get through one of these intros without jacking it up? Without further ado, go ahead and pour yourself a drink, settle in, and let's begin. We're talking about the heroic life of the warrior. It's on Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, and we're starting right now. All right, gents, and welcome back again to the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, still being recorded live from an undisclosed location south of the Mason-Dixon line. I'm your host, Mark, still in search of doing that intro perfectly on one take. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. All right, let's get back into it. We're talking about the heroic life. This is something that I came across a while back, just reading from scholars and stuff. You guys know that I geek out on ancient warrior cultures and trying to figure out what those virtues were and how to bring them and adapt them to the modern age. And this is a phrase I started butting up against, was this heroic life. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, what is that? So I've been doing probably entirely way too much research on this, but let's get into it. Let me give you my definition of what this heroic life is and why it's so important for us to study it, embody it, and live it. So the heroic life is a code of living, like I said earlier in the intro, that's rooted in courage. It's rooted in fate, honor, action, and sacrifice. In the ancient world, and whether you're talking about the icy fords of the north to the dusty plains of Greece, life was short, it was brutal, and often violent. Death could come at any time. So the question wasn't whether you would die, but it was how you would meet it. And not much has changed, right? I mean, the manner of our death may have changed. Most of us, thankfully, will not encounter a violent death, right? Or we hope not to. But yet, the one thing we do have in common with our ancestors is eventually we will all take our place among them. So the heroic life asks one thing of you, or demands one thing of you, and that is that you face your fate boldly, right? That meant standing firm in the face of impossible odds, keeping your word even when it hurt, and leaving a name behind that would echo after your bones had turned to dust. So that raises the question exactly of what that word fate means. That word has changed over the eons, right? And so I want to approach this from particularly a Northern Europe, a Germanic type base, but we'll look at some of the Greek stuff, and we'll look at some of these other virtues that I spoke about. And this is going to be a 30,000-foot view of this stuff. I'm not going to get way too deep in the weeds, so this is kind of like a survey of it. And then hopefully, if you guys are interested, I'll do more deeper dives on each of them. So the bulk of this transmission is going to be spent on talking about fate. Fate is very prominent in the life of ancient warriors, particularly in the West, but you'll find this in other cultures too. You'll find this in the Orient. You'll find it all over the place. It just plays out a little differently, but the concept there is there. All right, so let's start with one of the most important concepts in the Germanic or in the Norse worldview, and that is the concept of weird. Weird, not as we use it in our common English parlance. This weird is spelled W-Y-R-D, weird. All right, so weird is an Old English term that roughly translate as fate or destiny. It's closely related to the Norse concept of Urður, one of the three Norns, right, or fate goddesses. These were in their mythology where there were these three goddesses, or at least spirits, that weave the destiny of gods and men alike in the universe. All right, so weird is not simply a preordained script, but it's an unfolding of events that arise from past actions and decisions. So you might think of it as a tapestry of consequence. And in fact, oftentimes the Norns were characterized as being weavers, right? Or weaving a tapestry, which each thread of that tapestry would represent a life, or your life, right? And so you might think of it, like I said, a tapestry of consequence shaped by what has been done, but it's ever moving, it's ever flowing. So one example, and there's many in the sagas and the legends, but I'm going to look at a couple here. But one of them is from an Old English poem that's incredibly beautiful. It's incredibly sad. And if you feel like you're born out of time, like you should have been born like centuries ago, it will definitely resonate with you. You should read it. But it's called The Wanderer, or Earth Stepper, as it translates in Old English. But The Wanderer, this is where the speaker says that fate is wholly and inexorable, right? And in the epic Beowulf, which I have referenced countless times in this podcast, Beowulf himself is quoted as saying that, quote, fate goes ever as it must, unquote. So this reflects the belief that the warrior must face whatever comes, right? Not trying to escape fate, as many in other societies try to do, or bargain with it, right? But must strive to meet it honorably. And don't worry, I'm going to break this down into how this can apply to us today. So just stick with it, right? So anyway, let's think of weird as weaving of cause and consequence, right? It's a tapestry. Keep thinking of that word picture of a tapestry and what that looks like, being woven by past actions, your past actions, right? Part of your weird, right, is your past actions that are going to affect you in the future, right? So both of your own and those of others. Other people's actions affect your weird too. They're tied together in that tapestry, right? And the inescapable forces of the cosmos, that kind of wild card that we don't know what's there. We don't always know how things are working behind the scenes. We can't see it, right? But here's the key difference, right, versus some other cultures which are deterministic in nature, where fate is something that you can't change, right? Here's the key difference. Weird is not fixed, right? It's not it is fatalistic, where we get that word fate, right? It is fatalistic, but it's not It's not fatalistic determinism. It's a web. And through our actions, we tug at the threads. So our past shapes us, yes, but conscious, bold action can, in a sense, redirect those patterns, right? So weird is a pattern you inherit and the pattern that you shape by choice. So there's a certain sense of your weird, right, that is fixed. So if you were born a male, right, you can't really change that, or born a female, right, without getting into why did I use that as an example? Why did I do that? Anyway, I think you know where I'm saying. Or your parents, how about that? Let's use that. You were born to a certain set of parents. You were born inside a certain nation, whatever that is, right? And you can move and everything, but you can't change that. That is part of you. And depending on who your parents are, their station in life, the type of opportunities you get, those things, that's baked in the cake, right? And that's going to have an impact on you for better or for worse, right? But the point is we don't celebrate victimhood, right? If you get a bad set of circumstances, you can overcome them, right? Through choices you make now. You can shape it. You have a vote, right? And so it's the momentum of your past combined with the force of your will in the present. Right? So it's one part fixed due to past events, actions, and circumstances, but part malleable based on your own choices up to a certain extent, right? That you make as you apply your force of will by the way of your actions, by the way of your knowledge, your skills, and your abilities. So fate is something that a superior man, right, can rise above in part by acting consciously and heroically rather than just passively submitting to it. There's plenty of other cultures out there that would tell you fate is fixed, fate it is, and you need to submit to it or go with it, go with the flow type of things. And not saying that those in certain contexts don't have merit either. It's just this is different from the Northern European kind of view where it's not something that you just passively accept if you don't want to. It's something that you very much have a choice in, right? You have a say. Even if you lose, right? Even if you don't get the outcome you want, that, as we're going to see, isn't really the point. The point is much more greater. It's how you face it. So for the warrior, what matters most is the manner in which you face your fate, not the outcome itself. It's the manner that you face it rather than the outcome, the way things play out. So let's dig a little deeper with some examples that I quoted earlier. The wanderer, right? Fate is wholly inexorable, right? So let's talk about the context of what the wanderer is. Wanderer is an old English poem, right? It's narrated, right? The main narrator, the only narrator in this poem is a warrior who has lost everything. He's lost his lord, he lost his companions, wiped out, just completely butchered and brutalized before his eyes, and his place in society. So now he finds himself in this poem. He's a solitary exile, right? He's wandering through the land. He has no home. He has no tribe. He has no kin. They've all been wiped out. He has nothing. And so as he is kind of telling you of his state and talking about what's happened and what he's going through, he shares his feelings. And when I say he's alone, he's so alone he can't even share his thoughts with anyone. There's no one there that can appreciate, or there's no one there he trusts that he can share what has happened with him, right? And so he begins to reflect on the impermanence of life, right? How fragile life is. The once great halls, the mead halls that he took his place in, it's gone. And he's staring the inevitability of death, not just death of his friends, but the death of all things that will come to all of us in time. And so when he says, I put the quote, the actual quote in Old English, but I will not even butcher the pronunciation. But if you don't know much about Old English, I highly recommend you YouTube and listen to some people speak it. It's absolutely beautiful. And just as a side note, I think Thomas Jefferson wanted to make that actually the language of the land here. I feel like I've read that somewhere. If not, it's a cool story, right? But anyway, it didn't win out. But back to the show. He's acknowledging that fate is unchangeable. Like once the events have taken place now, right? No one can alter the course of events once they are set, right? So I'm not double talking. I'm not talking out of both sides of my mouth. Fate is malleable. You have a vote, but there is that tipping point, right? There is like if you get into a car wreck, well, you're in a car wreck, right? You can't change that, right? Once those sequence of events have rolled into place, you know there is a certain point in time where you can't change fate, right? And this is where he finds himself, right? He cannot change what has happened. So the poem is deeply melancholic, right? It is deeply it's brutally sad, but he's not nihilistic, right? So despite his loss and his loneliness and having been wiped out of everything, right, this dude isn't some waste, right? He's still a warrior, right? And he has within him the power, the force of will to endure, right? So how does he handle this? And you'll find that he reflects on his experiences with wisdom, and he realizes that everything, even though everything passes away, right? It's the role of the warrior to accept that, right? That he can't rail against weird, right? He can't take his fist and shake as much as he wants to because he realizes it's not going to do any good, right? And so he understands that by the force of his will, he must endure, right? And that there's dignity in bearing a misfortune without complaint. And man, do I need that in my life, right? Do I struggle with that? I really do, y'all. You would think, like being in the infantry and being a soldier, you'd be incredibly stoic. And I have met people that are, but I will tell you, some of the biggest complainers and whiners are soldiers. And most of us will tell you they are. We can endure a lot, but we'll usually do it with a lot of, we're called grunts for a reason, a lot of grunting and bemoaning and bitching about it. But anyway, moving on. He also clings to the memory, right, and to the wisdom. And he recalls these virtues of bravery, the loyalty that he had from his Lord, right, his Lord to him and him to his Lord, and to this band of brothers, to the Mannerbund or the Kurios, right, this group of warriors, the retinue, right, and he values, right, the values that gave life and meaning before weird stripped it away of everything else, right? And I do want to say too, the concept of weird that you often find, it's a wild concept. I'm not sure even the ancients really had it nailed down, but there is a sense of where it's an impersonal force. So if I may do a deeper dive on this, because it is fascinating, particularly when you find the pre-Christian societies of the north, of the Saxons and the Scandinavians and Northern Germans, when they convert to Christianity, they bring this concept of weird with them. And so you see these poems that are probably predate Christianity, and then, a Christian scribe or monk or something starts writing in place of probably when they were mentioning gods, they mentioned the God of the Bible instead, and they kind of excise that stuff out. You can definitely see that, I think, in Beowulf and everything. But this concept of weird was still very much imprinted in the culture, right, into the collective unconscious, right, as Jung would say. And so it does very much seem to be an impersonal force to a certain extent, that even the gods are bound by it, right? So anyway, getting back to our plot line here. So when facing weird, it's not even about just dying in battle, right? It's about, in this case with the Wanderer, right? Because he didn't die in battle. For him, how he faces his fate or how he faces weird is about enduring the exile. It's about enduring the loss and the grief that he's experienced without breaking, right? Without breaking, without feeling sorry for himself and giving him an excuse to, do what he wants, to lose his mind, to give up on the virtues, right, that he lived when he was among his Lord and his bros and his buddies, right? He's not abandoning any of it, right? He holds strong in the face of it, and he'll hold strong until the time of his death, right? Because he's a warrior who is living the heroic life, right? And while he's not facing a dragon or an army before him, he's dealing with grief. He's dealing with the destruction of all that he has known and loved, and he's facing it without it breaking him. It's very powerful. It's very powerful. And we definitely need that, right? If you're on the warrior path, you need this, right? We need this. All right, let's move on. I could talk much more on that, but I'm going to move on because, like I said, 30,000 foot view. I'm going to go on to Beowulf, right? Which I referenced Beowulf a lot in the podcast. So there's a point in time where Beowulf is talking about Beowulf. He's a Scandinavian warrior, right? Beowulf was an epic poem that was found in England. It was written in Old English, but don't forget that this was when it was written, or what first spoken orally, right? This story was from a time when the Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes from northern Germany invaded as the Romans left. I think that was around in the 400 AD, somewhere around there, right? That they're invading and taking it over, right? So, and then their language, Old Saxon, becomes Old English, that kind of stuff. All right, so he's a Scandinavian warrior, but he says in there, fate goes ever as it must. So this line is spoken by Beowulf himself. It's before the climactic battle, I believe, with Grendel's mother. It's been a minute since I've read it. I'm pretty sure he's fighting his mother. We'll get into he's fighting his mom. His mom's a monster too. Grendel is the monster that was terrorizing Harald at the mead hall of Hrothgar. So after he's already defeated Grendel, right, he's going after his mom, and he descends through this like lake, which is metaphor of the underworld, right? Maybe even the subconscious, right? The unconscious and everything too, like that. So it comes to a moment where Beowulf knows he's risking his life again by descending into this dark, this unknown lake to fight this deadly supernatural foe, right? And so how does he handle this? So he acknowledges fate's power, right? Beowulf, he does do a lot of bragging on himself, and rightfully so, because he's a certified badass, but he doesn't presume victory is guaranteed by skill and courage alone, right? He understands that fate is going to decide the outcome. He's going to do his best. He's going to put his best foot forward, but he understands that there's a certain amount of luck, right? There's a certain, the will of your opponent is the wild card. That you're the threat, or your opponent, the enemy gets a vote too, right? And so he's very much aware of that. So he acknowledges when he faces this foe that fate is going to have the final decision on the outcome. But he chooses boldness anyway. He doesn't even know if he's going to win or not, but he chooses to be bold anyway. Knowing that he might die, he willingly faces the danger head on. He arms himself, and he makes his preparation, and he acts decisively. So there's a boldness to the heroic life, right? It's a life of action, right? Not recklessness, right? Boldness, don't ever confuse or conflate boldness with brashness, right? Recklessness, right? And then also he seeks honor in the fight itself. So victory or death, either outcome is going to be acceptable for him as long as he meets his weird or his fate with courage and integrity. What battles are you facing right now? What problems you have that seem larger than life right now that you're dealing with? I just came out of one I referenced a couple podcasts ago, and I told you I knew I was going to make it on the other side, and I did. And I'm not. I'd be lying if I told you that I wasn't thinking about Beowulf and these divine ancestors, if you will, of ours, right? So here's the key difference, right? And about where the wanderer deals with enduring Weird's hardship after defeat, and Beowulf, who demonstrates how a warrior actively faces Weird in battle and danger, right? Before things have become irreversible, right? Beowulf isn't passive. He moves towards it. He moves towards the danger, right? He moves towards the obstacle, knowing its power, but still striving to act nobly within it. And that's the key, right? They both act nobly. They both are men of action, but they're doing it kind of at different points where Weird or fate has affected them, right? So why does any of this matter? All right, why am I talking about this? So both quotes come from different situations, like I said, and I may have jumped ahead a little bit, but anyway, the wanderer faces the aftermath of Weird, the loss of his kin, the Lord, the worldly joys, and he endures. Beowulf faces Weird in the moment of decision. At the brink of battle, he acts. So together they reveal the two faces of the heroic response to fate in Germanic thought. And that is, number one, accepting loss and hardship with wisdom and stoicism. And maybe I'll do one on stoicism too. I'm not a huge fan of stoicism, but all these philosophies have their merits and everything. There's definitely some good stuff with it. My biggest problem maybe is that it's just been profaned in the modern world, because stoicism was more than a philosophy. It was a spirituality with it as well. But that people today in the modern world, the secular humanists, they like to excise that and just kind of talk about the human aspect of it, right? But anyway, neither here nor there. So number two, so let me just backtrack so you're not lost. So accepting loss and hardship with wisdom, and how about this, strength, right? And then number two, facing danger, not brashly or recklessly, but facing danger and death boldly, seeking honor regardless of the outcome. And boom, that's a big one. Seeking honor regardless of the outcome. In both instances, neither one rails against Weird. Neither one pretends to control it, but both hold to the things that they can control, and that is their courage, their loyalty, and their action as a proper response to a world where fate is relentless, where it is unpredictable. Right. And so that's the big takeaway. So I mentioned a lot about honor and glory, right? So when you're living, if you embark on the heroic life, right, we have to have a proper understanding of fate and how we're going to approach it, right? And part and parcel of the manner in which we approach it implicates honor and even glory. All right. So once we understand that certain aspects of fate are set, that Weird moves as it will, death is inevitable, right? We arrive at an ancient truth that shaped the lives of our ancestors, be they Germanic, Greek, and other Indo-European peoples, right? And it's this: what matters most is not how long you live, but it's how well you live. Let me say that again. I'm going to double tap on that one. What matters most is not how long you live, but it's how well you live. So what do we mean by living well according to these traditions? The answer lies in this: honor, glory, and reputation. All right, so let's look at honor in the Germanic world. And when I say Germanic world, I'm talking about continental Germany, Scandinavia, England, Northern Europe, right? All right, so honor in the Germanic world. So in the pre-Christian Germanic world, right, so that's the world of the Norse, Anglo-Saxons, the continental German tribes, honor was the public measure of a person's worth. So it wasn't something that you claimed for yourself. You didn't claim honor for yourself, right? It was earned through deeds and confirmed by your community, right? So to be honorable meant that you were courageous in battle and in hardship, and we just looked at two examples of those, right? That you were loyal, right, to your Lord. You were loyal to your kinfolk, as we say down here in the South, and your companions. It also meant that you kept your oaths. Oath keeping was a huge deal in the Germanic world. one of the worst sins, if you will. Not that they had that concept of sin as we understand it today, but a close analogy would be if you broke an oath. If you made an oath and you broke it, that's really one of the worst things you could do. So you were highly encouraged to keep your oaths, and so therefore not to take them lightly, not to swear them lightly, right? Because you were expected to keep it no matter the cost or lose your honor. And losing your honor was worse than death, right? Generosity to your kith and kin, and then protecting your family and your tribe. You do those things, you're living an honorable life, right? Your reputation was your legacy. And in a sense, it was a kind of immortality in a world where the afterlife was sometimes uncertain, right? That's a rabbit hole we'll jump down to there as far as their concepts of the afterlife. But the big takeaway is just to remember honor was earned through deeds and action, and that was your reputation. And in fact, it was your legacy that you in a certain sense bequeathed to your tribe, to your community, and to your descendants in a certain sense. So an example, let's look at Beowulf again. So while Beowulf's fight with Grendel does offer some personal benefits, right? I mean, this dude ain't completely altruistic, right? He's getting something out of doing these things too, right? Like glory and renown, right? Or renown. It's not solely driven by him. He's not completely doing it for himself. And it's very clear in the story, right? That Beowulf is also motivated by a combination of yes, personal ambition, but also duty, right? And also a desire to repay the debts of honor to King Hrothgar. So King Hrothgar was a king that was being, his whole crew was being terrorized by Grendel and everything. And so long time ago, King Hrothgar had done some good things for Beowulf's dad, and Beowulf's dad didn't forget that. He told Beowulf about it, and Beowulf grew up knowing stories about King Hrothgar, what an honorable guy he was. And so when he heard that he was having trouble, like, Beowulf saw this as a way to repay that honor debt, right? Because he had been so kind to Beowulf's father. So it was the right thing to do. And then it upheld his reputation as being a fierce warrior, and it also brought honor to his people. He was also doing this to bring honor to his people and to fulfill his duty as a warrior, right? Like I said, repaying that honor debt. So Beowulf his honor isn't proven by what he says, but it's by what he does and how others remember those deeds. So his name lives on because his actions made his name worthy, right? So I want to also talk a little bit about the Greek concept of glory, and that is kleos, right? Kleos is glory and eternal fame. So the ancient Greeks had a word for enduring reputation, and it's kleos, K-L-E-O-S. So kleos means glory, fame, renown, what people say about you after you die. So the Greeks, especially in the Homeric age, kleos was the highest ideal that a man could pursue. So one example is Achilles in the Iliad, right? He's offered a choice. So there's I think his mom, who was a goddess, or somebody tells him, hey, you got two choices here while you're at war with Troy. You can go home now and you can live a long, comfortable life without fame, or you can die here in battle in a very short life, right? He's very young, cut down in the prime of youth, right? But glorious life, ending in battle with eternal renown. And he's really hard pressed on this, but in the end, he chooses to die in battle. He chooses glory. He chooses kleos. Why? Because life is temporary. Kleos is eternal, right? If men speak your name after you're gone in their culture, if your deeds live on in story and song, you never truly die, right? Now, before I go on, I just want to do a quick cut here, because as you're reading this as a modern American or European or wherever you're listening to this to, right, our society doesn't view eternal life like that anymore. Some of us have a hard time wrapping our head around that. That don't, because the point is, think of it metaphorically speaking, right? We die several times in our life, right? Anytime you learn something new, anytime you come through a painful experience or some kind of challenge and you overcome it, there's a part of you that has died. That old self has died, and you are reborn into this new self. So in a sense, so when you graduate from high school, right? And you go off to college, or you go off to the military, or you get your first job and you get a mortgage and you start paying bills and you start a family, right? That old self, in a sense, has to die, right? The youth, the careless, lack of responsibility and everything of your youth, that has to die as you become an adult. But as you become to an adult, you step into a new life with more possibilities, right? You are working a job, you have more money, you have more opportunities available to you. You can push yourself in a different way. And so in a sense, you are reborn, right? So you can think about these things metaphorically, right? But when we look at these epic stories, they're always larger than life examples, but they are templates for us to look at, right? And so that's why I bring that one to bear. So his choice speaks the truth that's known across the Indo-European warrior cultures, that what outlasts the grave is your reputation. Your name and honor is carried forward by others, and your deeds shape your memory. So think about your legacy. What are you leaving down to your kids or to your loved ones, right? How will you be remembered, right? What kind of example? How are you living, right? And so why does all that matter in this world, right? In these ancient traditions, it wasn't just enough to simply survive, right? And to live well meant living with courage, integrity, loyalty, in a way that left a worthy name behind. In our modern society is often it's comfort driven. It's egalitarian to the point of just flattening everybody to flattening distinction, right? And you guys know what I'm talking about, particularly those of you who are listening in America, right? Most of you who grew up, or probably grew up at the time where, every kid on the Little League got the trophy, right? Everyone gets a certificate at the end, right? Whether they played well or not, right? There was always this idea growing up that, we've got to boost these kids' self-esteem, so we'll just give them everybody trophies. We'll give regardless how you perform, you all get the same rewards, right? And so the whole point was to flatten that distinction, right? And you grow up, it's vainglory, it's emptiness, right? It's not anything that was earned, right? The modern world is suspicious of any kind of hierarchy. Any type of pride and excellence, right, is automatically suspect. Or you're looking at being vain. You're looking at being a braggart or things like that, arrogant and cocky. If you have well-placed pride, I'm not talking about being arrogant without anything to back it up, but being prideful, and I mean that in a healthy way, and having heroic type ambitions, right? You have a heroic ambition to do something great, to do something big. Everyone's going to tell you you're being unrealistic, right? You're doing pie in the sky stuff, right? That's what society is. It's always trying to bring you down. It's always trying to flatten everybody to the lowest common denominator. And they're always focused on safety, on consumption, right? Hey, be a spectator, right? Don't participate, don't create, right? And get immediate individual gratification. It's all about you, right? It's all about number one in the modern world, right? That is something that our ancestors did not recognize. In such a world, ancient values like honor and duty and reputation, they certainly can seem outdated, right? Naive, even dangerous, right? But the reality is these values, they still matter. They give weight to life. They give meaning to life, and in a direction in ways that comfort and ease cannot. Comfort, ease, safety, security, right, cannot give your life the same weight and meaning and direction, right, as these values of honor and courage and loyalty can, right? So even though we don't live in the great mead halls, right, or fight sea monsters like Beowulf, right, every person still has moments where courage is required. There are still times in your life where loyalty is tested. There are still times in your life where keeping your word is hard, right? There are still times in your life where there is opportunities to protect others, even when there is a cost to yourself, right? And there is always a time in your life where you have a choice between choosing an easy path or one that is more worthy, right? And it's in those moments when we decide, that's the moment when we decide what kind of person we're going to be, right? Who we are and what kind of name we're going to leave behind. So it's not simply enough to live. You must live in such a way that you earn honor and you leave behind a name that is worthy of remembrance, right? And if I haven't hammered this point home enough, let me add that the heroic life isn't about being invulnerable, right? It's not being about perfect or always being successful, right? That is not what it's about. And if you look at these sagas and these epics, you will see these heroes have their flaws. These heroes lose. Oftentimes they die at the end, but that's for a purpose, right? But the point is that what they all have, and the true heroes all have in common, is that they faced fate boldly. They upheld their honor, no matter the cost. And they left behind a legacy of courage, integrity, and loyalty, right? And let me tell you, that's as rare now as it was then, but it's no less meaningful. So let's talk about living this heroic life today, right? So what, if we look at these two examples, and again, I try not to get too deep in the weeds, but it goes very deep, very deep. And I may even do an episode where I contrast some other cultures so you can kind of see how other warrior cultures dealt with these issues, how they were alike and how they were different, right? I'm not saying that one is better than the other. It's you can choose that for yourself, right? But I can tell you what path I'm choosing. I'm choosing the one of my ancestors, right? And it's this one here. Number one is embracing your weird or your fate, right? I like the term weird, right? But fate, we can use that too. So understanding death is certain, but meaning is made in how you live. So you face these life challenges head on, knowing what your deeds weave your own fate, right? You are part of the axis of action, right? Set trials for yourself, right? Choose challenges that test your body, your mind, and your character, right? And you could start even things like a difficult workout regimen if you're able to do that, or just dealing with some uncomfortable truths. It's probably the biggest one for most of us is that to actually confront things about ourselves and our current circumstances that we're kind of would rather hide from, right? Or run away from, but facing them instead. Having that hard conversation with someone. All of those examples are examples of people who live, right? As one who acts, right? The other thing is strengthening your mind and body. So, if you've listened to this podcast for any length of time, I put a premium on training physically, right? That's just a non-negotiable. You got to be doing that if you're able. I understand if you're disabled, but it's finding what you can do where you're at, not measuring yourself to someone else, but what are you capable of? And then leaning into that. Also, reading these old texts, and I'm not talking about listening to Audible, right? Read these things, right? Some of these texts, I understand they're old. They can kind of be hard to read sometimes because they don't read like a regular novel, but it's like anything else. Once you start reading them, your brain adjusts to it. You get used to it, and they're very exciting. They're great reads, right? So do those things. Sacrifice to gain strength and wisdom. Speak truly and act loyally. Keep your promise. Speak right words. Take right actions, right? Build your name by your actions, not by what you say. Here we go. I'm going off on a tangent. Your actions reveal what your heart is. What's in your heart? I've heard this before, some kids messing up. I used to hear this a lot in religious circles, but, some kids jacking up and messed up, and, someone always makes an apology for him. It's like, oh, well, he's on rough times now, but he's got a good heart. Well, his actions don't reflect that. Your actions reflect what's in your heart, right? So make sure you're building a name with right actions, right? And then no one will question what's in your heart. Moving on, sacrificing for something greater, right? What is that greater thing that you can put your hand to the plow for? Whether it's your family, your tribe, truth, your legacy, whatever it is, what is it that you're willing to bleed for, metaphorically speaking, maybe physically too, but what will you fight for when no one else will? What is that thing, right? That's only something you can answer. And then seeking a name that outlives you. There's a Norse proverb. It's in the Havamal, the words of the High One, supposedly given to us by Odin, but it's a beautiful read. It's very short, but there's a phrase in there that says, cattle die, kinsmen die, but there's one thing that doesn't die, and that's a man's name, right? So live in such a way that your name means something after you're gone, right? Imagine if you did that. What kind of life would you have? You wouldn't have to wait till you were dead to have it celebrated. That would happen in your life, in your lifetime, right? Think about that. So let's wrap it up, right? If there's one thing that you can take away from today's episode, it's this. The heroic life, right, it's not a relic of the past, right? This is not something to be dusted off on a shelf to be admired and to be stared at, right? It's a way to live in the modern world. It's a way to live with strength. It's a way to live with courage. It's a way to live with purpose, right? These ancient myths and stories were never just stories. They were training grounds for the soul. They were templates for action, right? So act on them. Guys, I really appreciate you joining me on this journey. I hope you enjoy this. I hope you got something out of this. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend, right? Someone else who's walking on the warrior's path. Have a conversation about this, right? Hold each other accountable on how you're going to live. Build your tribe around these values, right? And if you did dig it, let me know. Do you want more of this? Do you want me to go deeper into weird, into fate and or things like that? I don't know if you don't tell me, right? So I want to put the content out that is not just, I don't want it just be entertaining. I want it to be valuable to you. I want it to be something you can use. So hit me up. Hey, once again, thank you to my subscribers out there. Both free and especially thanks for you premium subscribers. I really appreciate it. Until next time, I'm Mark signing off, telling you to stay sharp and keep it pearl snapped.